The reason we wanted to develop a guide, and particularly relative to some of the things that are impediments in the area, is because there is so little progress that's been made in terms of true outcomes. And so we really want to create a vehicle to share best practices that are actually working, that are moving the needle to guide organizations to actually have more women in the CEO pipeline and relative to board succession. And one of the things that I think is a huge challenge around this that we want to address is that in many ways the concept of women and gender diversity in top leadership, be it in the boardroom or I think even more importantly in terms of P&L roles and operating roles, is a series of kind of fortuitous appointments versus real strong succession pipelines that create options of leadership that really enable women to always be in the consideration set for these important roles. We not only need to get more strategic in the planning around women, but we really need for gender diversity or diversity of all kinds to be hardwired into the traditional processes around succession and development. I mean, this is really a very simple way to say it, and it's much harder to do. But what we're really looking for is to identify earlier on the women who have the highest potential and to create direct connectivity to those critical pass-through roles that are the ones that will be selected from when decisions get to be made. So that's ultimately what needs to happen, and hopefully this guidebook will create opportunities for people to see what others are doing that are generating that kind of consistency in outcomes. Well, one of the things that's interesting in increasing global competition and why that has direct relevance to women in leadership is that there are some innate capabilities that women bring to the table that happen to be highly synergistic to the future of work and to innovation and growth. And having led a recent study called Women CEOs Speak, which was funded by Rockefeller and their 100 by 25 initiative to have 100 women CEOs in the Fortune 500 by 2025, that's the 100 by 25, we found a number of things. And one of the things that we found is that there were some very consistent capabilities that women brought and some hardwired traits and values that were interestingly the same as some of the most sought after capabilities that Korn Ferry has found in our work around future leaders. So I think it's a remarkable synergy, and it really makes women in leadership incremental as a difference. So as a global organization, if you have all men in your top leadership rank, then just mathematically it can't equate that you have the best leadership and the most competitive leadership. So if you add that with some of these unique capabilities around empowering others and engaging and inspiring, agility, courage, and some of these other traits that are showing up very consistently in women in top leadership, it's a very compelling proposition. And it makes it really hard to argue that you've got the best leadership if you don't have a gender diverse leadership team. I think the Peterson study was really a very strong contributor in outlining why it's proven that gender diverse leadership teams actually generate the best results. BlackRock and others are starting to look at gender diversity in top leadership teams to equate the likelihood of a good investment risk because it's actually showing better results. So I think there's all kinds of reasons, but I like to think, I did an article recently called Leaders in Plain Sight, and I think women are the incremental difference that can make organizations more globally competitive, and it's an incremental difference. Korn Ferry's recent study on women in top leadership that included 57 women CEOs that we assessed through psychometrics and through behavioral leadership interviews was compelling for a couple key reasons. First of all, it showed that a lot of the capabilities and characteristics, meaning the hardwiring that makes us who we are, those characteristics and traits, were remarkably consistent despite very different styles, industries, etc. What that means is that organizations can identify potential in an early way. If we could identify some of those traits, characteristics, and capabilities at the middle management level, we could really build a pipeline with a lot more assurance and make sure that women like that are able to be in the roles that have the most draw for top leadership roles. The other thing that I think we learned is that there is a lot of synergy between what women bring in terms of team orientation, in terms of agility, in terms of actually lower confidence scores because of that team orientation, and higher humility scores that are very synergistic to what the millennials and generations behind them are really requiring of leaders in the future. So I think it's an exciting synergy that women may be the solution that the world requires in a lot of different areas. I also think that in this era of Me Too and a lot less social tolerance for inappropriate types of behavior, that having women in top leadership is just a good social contract as we move forward. And we saw a very high sense of purpose from the women in the study. Interestingly, about 2/3 of them had purpose as a primary driver. In other words, it wasn't money, it wasn't power, it was really a sense of purpose, and specifically around what could be accomplished in their organizations, communities, or the world at large. And I think we would be hard-pressed to find anyone on the planet today who doesn't think we need more leaders like that. I think we're really suffering from a deficit of strong leadership, and we have this pool of women that's totally underutilized that can make an incremental difference going forward. So it was really a very powerful study. I'll just comment because I just spoke yesterday to a group of 700 women leaders in a particular sector, and one of the things that happened was in sharing some of the research results. I got a note today from my 4 colleagues who are at the conference and industry experts that every keynote since I gave the opening has been referring to the research and how resonant it was for them. So I also am really excited about how the Women CEO Speak research report is turning the light on for women in helping them to see themselves and to understand and think beyond maybe the goals that they previously had. And despite the low number of women CEOs, to feel a sense of access to what does that look like and what is the path and can I be on it. It's interesting when you think in terms of whose responsibility it is to identify that pipeline of women leaders and to ensure that there is gender diversity in terms of the decision-making criteria, because it's way too late at that point in the process. And what we've found, and we recently, through the research, have used it to guide a new offering called Advancing Women Exponentially. And one of the things that I've told our team is we really can't afford to work with organizations on this offering unless the CEO personally is taking accountability for it. Because unless it's driven from the top, and ideally the board holds the CEO accountable for that. But this is really something that requires sponsorship. It is not something that will be innate. If it was, we've done research on headwinds for over 30 years, and we've had a really dismal change in terms of outcomes. In fact, just to give a point on that, when we were doing the Women CEOs Speak research, at the beginning of the project, we had 24 women CEOs in the Fortune 500. Over the course of the year that we did it, it went up to 35, only for one day, because one of the women retired the next day after the 35th person was appointed. Last week when I checked, it's at 23. So we're actually one less than we were a year ago, right? So if this was intuitive and understanding the headwinds was enough, we would have made a lot of progress. That is not the case. I think we now have the first actual roadmap to women CEOs that this research provided. But if it's not sponsored and owned in terms of an accountability from the very top, then behaviors won't change, because it has to be a very conscious decision to do things differently and for good business reasons, right? This is not a social do-good proposition. This is really about harnessing a level of power that can be incremental to businesses and can really change outcomes for businesses.